You sit before me, perhaps not in body but in spirit, and I feel the weight of your questions without you even speaking. This is the realm in which I have always lived, not in the sharp logic of the intellect alone, but in the twilight of symbols, the murmur of archetypes, and the silent roar of the unconscious. You come to me not for answers, but for a mirror. And so I will speak to the mirror within you. Let me begin with something you may already suspect. Sensitivity is not weakness. In truth, it is a doorway. But this doorway does not open to comfort. It opens to fire. The more sensitive you are, the closer you stand to the furnace of your own transformation. And herein lies the paradox. The more you feel, the more you recoil from what you feel most deeply, the more tender your heart, the more violently it rejects what it needs most wounding. Rejection, shame. Why? Because the soul does not seek comfort. It seeks wholeness. And wholeness demands confrontation with the parts of you you've been taught to loathe. I want you to imagine a dream, a familiar one for many sensitive souls. You are in a house, old and dimly lit. You descend the staircase, and at the bottom there is a locked door. Behind it you sense something breathing. You do not know its name, but you know it waits for you. You fear it, and yet you are drawn toward it. That house is your psyche. That door is your trauma. That breath behind the wood, that is the part of you waiting to be integrated, the exiled fragment, disowned and deemed too much. It may take the form of rage, neediness, envy, or the unbearable ache of longing. You have hated it, and yet it is yours. The sensitive soul, by which I mean not merely emotional, but permeable to subtle energies, attuned to inner patterns, lives with an intensified awareness of inner conflict. You do not merely think your pain, you become it. But such immersion is a double-edged blade. On one hand, it makes you a vessel of immense empathy. On the other, it tempts you towards self-rejection, because the sensitive person does not simply feel emotion, they identify with it. And in identifying with the pain, they mistake themselves for the pain. Thus, they try to sever it, to reject it, to kill it. But you cannot kill what is part of your own nature. You can only suppress it. And what is suppressed returns with a new phase: addiction, projection, depression, somatic illness. The unconscious is a master dramatist. What you refuse to make conscious, it will act out in the theater of your life. You must understand, healing is not the removal of pain. It is integration of pain into meaning. If you merely silence your suffering, you amputate a piece of your soul. But if you listen, the wound becomes a teacher. I have seen this again and again, not in books, but in the hidden language of dreams, in the trembling hands of patients who came to me not with broken bones, but with broken archetypes. They thought they were ill. No, they were incomplete. The sickness was a signal. The symptom was the symbol. They had turned away from something essential within themselves and paid the price in suffering. So I ask you, as I asked them, what do you hate most about yourself? Go on. Whisper it if you must. That part, the one you hide, deny, disown is precisely the key to your transformation, not because it is noble, but because it is yours. The soul will not allow a lie to stand unchallenged. You cannot pretend to be whole while carrying contempt for a part of your being. This is why sensitivity becomes a curse. When it is unaccompanied by courage, you feel deeply. But if you do not have the strength to face what you feel, you become imprisoned by it. You run from shadows that are merely yourself, dressed in different clothes. And what are these shadows? Truly, I use a term not to romanticize, but to name a reality that psychology often fears to admit. There are parts of you which you buried alive. These are the unwanted children of your inner world, the instincts, the desire, the fears that your ego deemed unworthy. But the psyche as a whole, it does not function as a hierarchy. There is no good or bad self, there is only the self, and the self is a constellation, a cosmic arrangement of opposites held together by tension and paradox. The shadow is not your enemy. It is your unintegrated truth. Perhaps you say, but I don't want to be angry, I don't want to be needy, I don't want to be selfish. And I say precisely that resistance is the very fuel of your suffering. The stronger your sensitivity, the more clearly you see these traits. And because you see them so clearly, you recoil. But recoil is not release, it is attachment in reverse. You remain bound to what you reject, and the more you hate it, the more it grows in power. Look at the myth of the Hydra. Each time the hero cuts off one head, two more appear. This is the nature of repression. Only when he cauterizes the wound, when he integrates his battle with the creature into a whole act, does the monster finally die. Your shadows must be acknowledged, not indulged, but understood. They must be spoken to in the language of myth, symbol, ritual. For the psyche does not speak English. It speaks image. When you dream of a snake, you are not dreaming of a reptile. You are dreaming of transformation, of the shedding of skin, of renewal, of fear. Each image is a portal. I recall one woman, deeply sensitive, tormented by recurring dreams of drowning. She hated this dream. She feared the water, but the water was not punishment. It was the unconscious, rising, demanding her attention. She had lived too long on the surface, pleasing others, denying her instincts. The dream was not her enemy, it was her soul's cry for depth. Only when she stopped fighting the tide, when she allowed herself to feel the drowning as metaphor, did the image shift. In time, she began to swim. The dream changed, not because she conquered it, but because she listened. Do you see? The more sensitive you are, the more clearly you hear the voice of the unconscious. But that clarity comes at a cost. You also hear the pain more acutely, the conflict more loudly. It becomes unbearable unless you understand its purpose. That which torments you is not random. It is patterned. It is archetypal. Your suffering is part of an ancient map, written in the language of symbols older than civilization. When you begin to read that map, the pain becomes intelligible. It ceases to be meaningless agony and becomes an initiation. But this requires that you stop treating your pain as an obstacle and begin treating it as a guide. You must allow yourself to descend into the basement of the psyche, into the underworld. You must speak with Hades, not merely pray to Apollo. Sensitivity without descent is sentimentality. It weeps at the surface, but fears the abyss. Real transformation, the kind that rearranges your entire orientation to life, only happens in the depths. You must learn to feel without drowning, to see without flinching, to enter the darkness without losing your candle. And what, you may ask, is that candle? It is meaning, not abstract meaning, not philosophical justification, but soul meaning, what the poet Rilke called the deep inner yes to life, even when it wounds. When you begin to see your sensitivities not as liabilities but as portals, when you stop asking, how do I fix this, and begin asking, what does this ask of me, you become an initiate. You enter into a new covenant with yourself, one in which your sensitivity becomes the tool of your awakening. There is a sacred wound at the center of every life. Yours may be abandonment, rejection, invisibility. And I will tell you now, it will not go away, but it will change form. It will become holy if you allow it. You do not become whole by being unhurt. You become whole by learning to carry the hurt with reverence. The more you hate what hurt you, the more you feed it. But the moment you turn toward it, not to judge, but to understand, you reclaim your power. There is no shortcut through this. There is no bypass. The spiritual life is not an escape from the shadow. It is a confrontation with it. Even Christ, the archetype of redemption, descended into hell before he ascended. The Buddha faced Mara beneath the Bodhi tree. The myth always teaches the same thing. The light you seek is hidden in the darkness. You avoid. And so I ask you now, gently but firmly, what have you refused to feel? Let us leave it here for now, not with closure, but with invitation. In the next part, we shall go further into the symbolic terrain where healing and hatred become one, where archetypes reveal the paradox, the wound and the cure are often the same thing. You have stayed, and that tells me more than any word could. Most flee when the first veil lifts, when the darkness starts to speak, but you have chosen to remain, to listen not just with the mind, but with the raw, vulnerable instrument of the soul. And so we go deeper now into the territory where the symbols thicken and the air becomes heavy with memory, not memory of the mind, but of the blood, the bones, the ancestral soul. I said earlier that the wound does not vanish, it becomes sacred. Let me now show you how. Imagine a child, perhaps yourself long ago, standing at the threshold of something terrifying, abandonment, ridicule, violation. Something happened perhaps once, perhaps 1,000 times. And in that moment, the sensitive child was faced with a truth too large to absorb. And so a choice was made not by the ego, but by the deeper psyche. A part of the self was buried, sealed in the cave of the unconscious, not out of failure, but out of love. Yes, love. The psyche loves us too much to allow us to shatter. And so it hides what we cannot bear, but time does not forget. What is hidden is not gone. It becomes mythic. it transforms from mere experience into archetype. It begins to live as symbol. That child you once were, that wound you refuse to speak of, it has become a figure in your inner world. Perhaps you dream of a weeping girl behind a locked door, a boy lost in a forest, a pleading animal. You call it nightmare, I call it initiation. The psyche is inviting you to return, to retrieve what you lost, not just to remember, but to remember, to bring back together what was scattered. And why, you may ask, does hatred, why do we resist that which is ours? Because returning to the wound feels like betrayal. It means you must feel again what you swore never to feel. You must let the pain move through you. And this terrifies the ego, whose entire architecture is built on avoidance of pain. But the soul, of the soul, it does not care for safety. It cares only for totality. For truth, it will drag you clawing and screaming into the fire if it must, because it remembers what you've forgotten, that on the other side of fire is transmutation. And so the sensitive soul, aware of every flicker of feeling, attuned to the slightest shadow, suffers most, not from others, but from within. They carry the wound like a sacred curse. And worse, they begin to hate it. But this hatred is not simple. It is tangled. You hate your need for connection because you were abandoned. You hate your anger because you were punished for it. You hate your desire because it was mocked. And so the wound doubles. Not only are you hurt, you are now at war with the part of you that hurts. This is psychic fragmentation, a split in the kingdom of the self, and all healing is a reconciliation of exiled parts. But to reconcile, you must first meet them. And here, sensitivity becomes both a gift and a trap. For the sensitive person is like an open channel, everything flows in, including the voices of the past, the expectations of the culture, the unspoken trauma of the lineage. If you do not learn to differentiate, if you do not develop symbolic sight, you will drown in feelings that are not even yours. And this drowning leads to confusion, then resentment, and finally hatred of the very gift that was meant to awaken you. You must learn to see symbolically. This is essential. To see symbolically means to look at the world not as it appears, but as it reveals. A trembling hand is not just anxiety, it is a suppressed truth begging to be named. A panic attack is not random, it is the soul's protest against the life you pretend to be living. Depression is not merely chemical imbalance, it is the cry of the inner self whose life force has been denied. None of this is metaphor, it is reality, but our modern world, addicted to surface and speed, has forgotten the language of the soul. It treats sensitivity as illness and repression as wellness. But repression is death, a slow, quiet death of the inner world. You can function, yes. You can wear a mask, perform your roles, even succeed. But you will feel it. That haunting emptiness, that strange ache when you are alone, that sense that something essential is missing. Though you cannot name it, that is your shadow calling. And what does it say? It says, come home. Now, we arrive at the alchemical moment. I use that word intentionally, not poetically. Alchemy, the ancient science of transformation, is the symbolic key to healing. The alchemists were not merely obsessed with turning lead into gold. They were trying to understand the inner process by which the base elements of the psyche, the instincts, the fears, the traumas are transmuted into wisdom, power, and love. The sensitive person is a natural alchemist. Why? Because they feel the prima materia, the raw psychic material, more intensely, but without initiation, they do not know what to do with it. And so they drown in it or turn it against themselves. You must become the alchemist of your own wound. You must descend into the nigredo, the black stage, where nothing is clear, where all is chaos and disillusionment. This is the depression, the confusion, the loss of meaning. Do not resist it. It is the crucible. It is where the false self begins to melt. And as it melts, the deeper self, the one you were always meant to become, begins to emerge. But only if you stay, only if you do not numb, only if you refuse to betray your sensitivity by escaping into distraction. Fail it, hold it, let the wound speak, let the symbols rise. Write your dreams, watch the images that come, that face you cannot forget, that room you always return to, that voice in the distance. These are not random, they are messages. The unconscious is not chaos, it is cosmos, but in a different grammar. It does not speak in logic, but in rhythm. Archetype, myth, learn its language, and it will guide you. Fight it, and it will devour you. One patient of mine, a man who had been shamed his whole life for being too emotional, too tender, too soft, came to me after years of anxiety attacks. He had tried everything: medication, meditation, silence, but he had never tried listening. In a dream, he found himself holding a bird with a broken wing. He wanted to throw it away, to get rid of it. But the bird cried out, not in sound, but in ache. And in that moment, he realized the bird was his sensitivity, wounded, but still alive. He began to weep in my office, not from pain, but from reunion. That moment began his healing, not because the pain left, but because it became meaningful. You must understand, you are not broken. You are mythic. Your life is not a mistake. It is a story. And the wound is not a flaw. It is the inciting incident. It is what begins the journey. The more sensitive you are, the more clearly you hear the call. But the call is disguised. It wears the mask of suffering. Because if it came as joy, you would not change. Only the wound awakens the soul. Only the ache of separation draws you toward union. So I ask you now, are you willing to see your suffering as sacred? Are you willing to turn toward the very part of you that you have hated the most? The neediness, the fear, the shame, the hunger, and say, I see you. I will not abandon you. Again, if so, you begin the journey not of healing, but of holding. To become whole is not to be perfect. It is to be total, to embrace your chaos and your clarity, your rage and your grace, your power and your fragility. It is to walk with all your parts, not as enemies, but as companions. You will not do this alone. For in the depths, you will meet the archetypes, the ancient patterns of the soul, the mother, the father, the child, the trickster, the hero, the sage. They live within you, shaping your life silently. And as you descend, they begin to speak. Some will frighten you, some will guide you, all will initiate you, for archetypes do not judge, they reveal. They do not ask you to be good, they ask you to be real, and in time you will discover something astonishing. What you hated was never the wound, it was the loneliness, the exile, the silence around it. But once it is seen, once it is spoken, the hatred begins to dissolve, and in its place grows a strange tenderness, a reverence, a knowing that this too is you. You are the wound, yes, but you are also the healer. The more sensitive you are, the more you feel both. And when you stop running, when you sit by the fire of your pain and let it warm you instead of burn you, you become something rare. You become a soul, not a persona, not a performance, but a living, breathing, soul whole, sacred, untamed. We will continue, yes, for there is more to say. We have not yet spoken of the ancestral wounds or the collective shadow, or how your personal healing becomes a ripple in the wider world. But you are not who you were when we began. Something in you has already shifted, and that is enough for now. Now that you have tasted the truth of your own depth, the question shifts not whether you are wounded, but how far down you are willing to go. For the next descent is more subtle. It does not come with the drama of pain alone, but with the eerie silence that follows the storm. This is where many turn back. You see, for the initial stages of awakening often come with emotional floods, grief, anger, revelation, but after that, the soul falls quiet. Not because it is done speaking, but because it is now preparing for the real work to untangle the web, not only of personal pain, but of inherited trauma, of the ancestral echoes that live in your blood. This is the forgotten truth of the sensitive soul. You are a conduit. You do not merely feel your emotions, you feel through time. You are a vessel through which centuries of silenced grief, suppressed rage, and unlived potential arise. The more sensitive you are, the more this ancestral tide flows through you like a ghost river, and you may have wondered why your suffering feels older than you, why your dreams carry places you've never seen, why you weep at things that should not move you. It is not madness, it is memory, cellular memory, symbolic inheritance. You are carrying not only your wound, but the unwept tears of those who came before. And this is not romantic, it is burden, it is weight, it is the invisible inheritance that those born sensitive are asked to make conscious. In ancient traditions, such individuals were called sharpens, oracles, healers, not because they chose such a path, but because Their very bodies could not ignore it. The modern world has lost this language. We medicate what once was sacred. We pathologize what was once prophetic, but your soul has not forgotten. And so it keeps breaking in ways the world cannot explain. Now, do not misunderstand me. I do not glorify pain. Pain is real, devastating, but it is also precise. It reveals exactly where the fracture lives, not just in your personal psyche, but in your family system, your culture, your species. Every time you feel a disproportionate reaction when you break down over something seemingly small, that is a thread that, if followed carefully, leads to the archetypal root, a core image, often ancient, that must be named. For instance, one man I worked with carried an inexplicable fear of being seen. He would shake in meetings, avoid eye contact, hide even from his own family. At first, he thought it was social anxiety. But as we explored, dreams began to emerge, dreams of medieval trials, of public punishment, of masks nailed to faces. And in those dreams, he was not always the victim. Sometimes he was one casting judgment. You see, the unconscious does not present us only as the wounded. It also shows us as the wounding force, so that we may integrate both victim and perpetrator, both sides of the ancestral pattern through dream work. He began to uncover a lineage of spiritual persecution, grandparents who were silenced, great uncles imprisoned for dissent, mothers who swallowed their voice to survive. He had inherited not just the trauma, but the silence surrounding it. His soul could not bear the silence. And so it trembled, screamed, recoiled at the act of being seen. Not because he was weak, but because he was carrying too much truth. And sensitivity was the body's way of screaming what history had whispered. This is what I want you to understand. Your sensitivity is not the problem. It is the antenna. It is how the psyche alerts you to what the ego has refused to see. But an antenna without grounding becomes a lightning rod. You must root it in understanding. You must give the energy meaning, or it will fry your nervous system, and you will call it anxiety, depression, sensitivity disorder, when really it is unprocessed initiation. And what is initiation? It is a slow, painful, glorious awakening to who you truly are beneath the mask of survival. The ego is a mask, necessary, yes, but only a mask. It forms to protect, to adapt, to keep you functioning, but it is not your essence. And when you begin to heal, the ego becomes terrified, because healing means remembering, and remembering threatens the illusion of safety the ego has built. So it fights, it lashes out, it turns your own gifts into weapons. Your empathy becomes exhaustion, your intuition becomes paranoia, your compassion becomes self-sacrifice. But beneath that chaos, something ancient stirs. A figure waits, not a fantasy, but an archetype. Perhaps for you it is the wounded healer, like Chiron, whose wound never closed yet, who healed others Or perhaps it is a rebel, the outcast, the wise child. These are not roles. They are energetic truths. They live in you. They are you. And when you begin to speak to them not as concepts but as companions, you enter sacred territory. You stop trying to fix yourself and start trying to understand yourself. Now let us turn to the most difficult part of all. Love. Yes, love. You may wonder, what does love have to do with these depths of psychological excavation? Everything. For what is healing, if not the return of love to places it was once exiled? But here is the truth that sensitive souls struggle most to face. They often hate the parts of themselves that need love the most, the part that begs for touch, the part that wants to scream, the part that still believes in beauty, even after being shattered. You see, when you are sensitive, you often encounter the world as a wound, and in such a world, the vulnerable part becomes dangerous. So you cover it, harden it, scorn it, you become your own jailer. And then you call it strength. You call it self-protection. But it is only another wound. Sensitivity without self-love becomes self-abandonment disguised as self-control. You become high-functioning, yet hollow. You become admired, yet unknown. And so healing demands that you do something almost unbearable. You must soften, not to become weak, but to become whole. Softening is not surrender to pain. It is surrender to meaning. It is letting the pain reveal what it has always tried to show you, that beneath the ache is innocence, not naivety, but essentiality. The part of you that remembers beauty, dreams. I hope the original self, when you begin to touch that self, the world changes. Your sensitivity no longer isolates you, it connects you. You begin to see others not as threats, but as mirrors. You begin to feel not just your own pain, but the collective ache of a world that has forgotten how to feel. And here you must be careful, because this too can become a trap. You are not here to carry everyone's suffering. You are here to transmute it through consciousness, through art, through prayer, through honest conversation, through deep presence. You are not here to be a sponge. You are here to be a lens, and lenses must be clear, aligned, strong. This is the final phase of the sensitive one's journey from wound to mirror, to instrument, not an escape from suffering, but a recalibration of its meaning. You do not transcend your pain by rising above it. You transcend it by walking through it until you find the root, the symbol, the story. And when you do, the energy shifts, the weight becomes wisdom, the sadness becomes knowing, the tremble becomes truth. There is still more. In our final part, I will guide you gently into integration, not as a philosophy, but as an inner practice, not a task, but a remembering. For all this descent, all this darkness, has pointed to one place, the return of the soul, the reunion of what was scattered, the healing of the inner family. And yes, the beginning of love not as romance, but as reality. We are almost there. And so we arrive at the threshold, not of the end, but of the beginning. For all this descent, all this aching illumination of wounds and shadows and archetypal echoes has led you here. You who have stayed, listened, suffer through the mirror of my words. You are ready, not to be healed, but to become healing itself. For the final task of the sensitive soul is not merely to survive what they feel, but to become a channel for the sacred through what they feel. And that requires integration. Integration is not a tidy concept. It is not a checkbox, not a final exam, not a ritual of completion. It is a movement of the soul, ongoing, circular, often obscure. It means that what was once cast out is now given a seat at the table, that the part of you that trembles is invited to speak, that the one who rages is asked what they need, that the inner orphan is held not to silence it, but to let it cry. The psyche does not require perfection, it requires participation. Will you participate in the fullness of your own being? When the sensitive person has reached this level of maturity, something subtle but profound begins to shift. They stop asking, how do I stop feeling so much, and begin asking, what is this feeling teaching me about the story I am still living? Because make no mistake, sensitivity is not random. It is a response to narrative. Your body reacts to the unspoken myth. You are enacting perhaps the myth of the abandoned child, the exiled mystic, the cursed empath, and until that myth is made conscious, it runs your life like a ghostwriter behind the curtain. To heal, then, is not merely to feel better, it is to revise the myth, to take the pen back from the unconscious and say no more shrinking for love, no more betraying myself to be safe, no more silencing my hunger, my visions, my depth. You do not do this loudly. You do it softly, slowly, in the rituals of presence, in how you speak to yourself in the mirror, in how you cradle your fear at night, in how you stop abandoning yourself in the moment you most need to be held. Let me say this clearly. Self-abandonment is the root of suffering for the sensitive soul, not because they are selfish, but because they have been conditioned to feel responsible for everything, the pain of others, the peace of the room, the moods of the family, and so they abandon their own needs to tend to the external world. But this is not love. It is trauma reenactment. It is the wounded child trying to earn a place by disappearing. Integration demands that you reverse the spell. You do not need to disappear to be loved. You do not need to be silent to be safe. You do not need to bleed to feel worthy. You only need to return to yourself. The question becomes, how does the sensitive person begin this inner return, not with a map, but with presence, with radical honesty, with symbolic sight? When the inner critic rises and says, "You're too much," you ask, whose voice is this? Whose judgment have I swallowed? When grief overwhelms you, you no longer shame it. You become curious. What memory is surfacing? What part of me is asking to be seen? When rage explodes, you do not fear it. You trace it. You follow the heat back to the place it was first born. The betrayal, the boundary that was crossed, the moment you said yes when you meant no. This is sacred work. This is soul work. And it is not done through affirmation alone. It is done through courage, through feeling fully, without flinching, through reclaiming what was once demonized. You may think you are only healing yourself. But I tell you, every act of integration sends ripples through the collective. Every time you embrace a part of yourself you once hated, you make it easier for someone else to do the same. And this brings us to a truth. Few dare to speak. The world is not kind to the sensitive one. Not yet. We live in a culture of speed, nuance, domination, a culture that fears depth, resents mystery, and mocks vulnerability, and so you may feel alien, misunderstood, as though your depth is a burden, your ache an inconvenience. But hear me, you are not a mistake. You are a warning bell. You are the future, trying to be born. The age of suppression is ending, and those who feel deeply will lead the way, not through conquest, but through embodiment. You do not need to convince anyone of your worth. You only need to embody your truth so fully that the room shifts when you enter. This is not ego. This is essence. When you stop hiding, you give others permission to do the same. When you speak the language of symbols aloud, others remember their own. When you say, I am tired of carrying what is not mine, the lineage exhales through you. This is how we heal backwards through presence. Through choosing to be the one who ends the cycle of self-hatred, who looks at the wound and says, you can come home now. And so, at last, we come to the threshold of practice. Not practice as technique, but as remembrance. I do not ask you to journal daily, though you may. I do not ask you to meditate for hours, though it may help. I ask only that you notice where the wound still speaks in your life through your fears, your relationships, your impulses. Notice where you recoil from your own need, in your own voice, your own power, and instead of judging it, follow it. Listen to the symbols that arise, dreams, images, memories. Let them become guides. Not every vision is literal. Most are metaphors. But metaphors hold medicine. When the dream shows you drowning, it is asking, where are you overwhelmed? When the dream shows you naked in public, it asks, where do you feel exposed? When the dream shows you locked outside, it whispers, where have you denied yourself entry? Ask these questions, not with the mind alone, but with the body. The body remembers. Let it guide you. Let your trembling be sacred. Let your longing be a compass. Let your grief be a baptism. These are not metaphors. These are rituals of the soul, older than language. And above all, I ask you to soften, not to collapse, but to return to the part of you that has always known that sensitivity is not a problem. It is the path. The more sensitive you are, the more clearly you feel what the world has refused to face. The more clearly you feel what your family suppressed, what your culture disowned, what your lineage buried. And so you have carried it and hated yourself for carrying it. But now, perhaps, you can begin to see the pain was never yours alone. It was a message, a transmission, a call to remember who you are beneath the story, to remember that the wound is the oracle, to remember that healing is not the end of pain, but the beginning of participation. And so I leave you with this. You are not here to fix yourself. You are here to become yourself, to walk into the dark and emerge not clean, not perfect, but whole, wounded. radiant, real. And if you do this not once, but daily, moment by moment, you will become a mirror for others. Not by teaching, not by saving, but by being. And in that being, the world may finally begin to remember what it means to feel, what it means to heal, what it means to be human again. Go now, not to escape the pain, but to make meaning of it. Go and listen for the dream behind the dream. Go and find the symbol beneath the symptom. Go and sit by the fire of your own soul until it begins to speak again. For it has only waited for your return.